Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 2nd of December, comes to you from London. And we look at the dollar, first of all, just holding on to the medium and long-term trends. Short-term, we're under a little bit of pressure. We saw a bit of a fall-off there on Friday, but at the moment, the dollar index still showing its medium to long-term strength. And that means that Eurodollar actually is just looking a little bit stronger on the short-term chart, but medium and long-term still bearish, of course. Against the yen, the dollar is actually up slightly this morning, and so we are seeing that trend continuing. So that does give us some indication that dollar strength will come back this week. The yen tends to be a lead indicator for the dollar, and we're seeing the long-term chart actually starting to look better there as well. Sterling is sitting at 129.10 this morning against the dollar, and so that is actually looking still pretty strong, holding on. But obviously the election now keeping a pause on things. Against the euro, we're seeing sterling looking strong as well, and against the Swiss franc, also sitting at 129.11, looking strong there. Against the euro, 117.19 this morning, so that's quite a good level to be holding at the moment. Looking at Bitcoin, we're sitting at $7,228 this morning, and that, of course, is still bearish on all three time frames. And we do now have a target to 7,051 on the short-term chart, so another 2.5% lower. The S&P 500 index was down on Friday, but still looking pretty strong all round. Much the same with the NatGas, down 0.25%, and the Dow was down the same level as the NatGas, down 0.4%. The Russell 2000 index still not making new highs, but has cleared this level that we saw this year. So a lot of technical analysts seeing that as quite positive now. Looking at the S&P futures this morning, we're up 0.4% on the S&P, and on the Nasdaq E-mini we're up 0.4% as well. So it looks like the US market will open higher today. The UK market is up 0.5% this morning on the blue chip index, so we are seeing that holding the bullish ground there. And Midcaps up less strongly this morning, but still holding bullish on all three time frames. The DAX in Germany up nearly 0.5%, and the CAC Quarante up by a similar amount. So we are seeing European markets showing quite strongly this morning. Japan was up nearly 1% overnight, looking strong on all three time frames, coming back into long-term bullish. And the Hang Seng was up 0.4%, and the Shanghai Composite was up 0.1%. So the Hang Seng still bearish. The Shanghai Composite actually also still bearish. So still have work to do in Asia to match those US indices. In the exception being India, looking strong on all three time frames still, and the Aussie market up 0.25% as well, looking strong on all three time frames. Brent crude fell quite heavily last week, but we are seeing it up sharply this morning, up 1.5%. But that fall away on Friday has put us really very clearly in bearish territory there. So we're seeing a slight recovery this morning, but we saw big falls there on Friday, and that's what we'd expect at this time of year. Of course, we're long-term and medium-term bearish. WTI actually also looking bearish on the all three time frames, and US NatGas falling back to $2.36, also looking bearish there as well. Taking a look at gold, we're sitting at $14.54 this morning, nowhere near those $1,500 area that we saw earlier in the year, and we're just seeing here over the last few months we have just slowly sold off on gold. So we're medium term and short term bearish, long term is still bullish, of course. And if we look at silver, no surprise that there's a similar picture there as well. US 10-year yields also looking a little bit stronger this morning, so we're actually seeing the yield is actually up. We're sitting at 1.85% this morning, so that is actually looking pretty bullish, and quite a big jump there on Friday and continuing again this morning. So we are seeing the general recovery in yields playing out, and that means that bond prices are falling, and we're seeing that in European bonds. German bond down 0.5% this morning, continuing its fall, and this head and shoulders pattern that we talked about still playing out. If we take, so this data all coming from Thomson Reuters Icon or Metastock Zenith if you're a private user. If we take a look at the individual charts here, the individual stocks, I'm using Yahoo Finance here at the moment. So we look here, we've got, you can see a sea of red in Asia and the US on Friday, but Europe is actually looking quite strong this morning. Taking a look at the Dow, the worst performer in the Dow on Friday, sorry, the best performer was IBM. They're up 0.5%, and we're seeing here that their chart actually looking reasonably flat and the relative flat, so just really following the performance. The worst performer was Dow Chemical, Dow Inc. They were down 1.7%, and their downtrend continues. There we see the relative trend against the Dow Jones Index. If we take the look at the NASDAQ, again, most stocks down. We did see a handful of stocks up, Activision Blizzard. We're seeing stocks that really have underperformed, performing best on Friday, so we saw a lot of counter trend moves there. And if we look at the downside, we saw Dollar Tree, Henry, quite a lot of stocks lower there. So that had quite a big impact on the market. The Aussie market up, as we said, overnight. So Bigger Cheese Limited, they're up 4.5%. Quite a jump there. That might be a recovery in play. Still a bit early to say. And if we look at the downside, we see here that we had Main Pharma Group with the worst performer there, down 4.3%. So, but we are seeing a recovery there, and that might just play out. We see that in the relative chart. Looking at India now, the best performers were Indian Bull Housing, down. They're up 4%, but the chart is still looking pretty grim. And if we look at Bharti Infratel, they were up 4%. That chart looking much, much better, jumping to new highs. And if we look at the downside in India, we had Yes Bank featuring again, and the worst performer down 5%. It's been a tough recovery situation here, and it really hasn't played out at all. Looking to Europe now, if we take a look at the UK top 100, we start with Rio Tinto. They're up 2.4%, and so we're seeing here that still looking long-term bullish, but medium-term we have got work to do. On the downside, we see tobacco stocks up quite strongly this morning, and resource stocks. Ocado Group down 5%, having had their big move on Friday. They were up 11% on Friday, so we are just seeing that falling back, having really jumped. A lot of volatility in Ocado shares at the moment, so it's quite an interesting one to watch. If we take a look at the percentage changes, actually just looking at the FTSE 100 there, we see Hiscox Group. They're down 2.4%, and reckoned to be leaving the FTSE this week, with EasyJet coming back in, so it'll be interesting to see that. Looking at the 250 stocks, the best performer we're seeing this morning, Tullow Oil, Forex Pro. We're seeing a lot of these resource stocks coming in. Tullow Oil up 5% this morning, so that's quite a big jump there, although we've had really big falls lately in Tullow, so it's small beer for most investors there. Looking at the downside, Ted Baker Group down a further 8.7% this morning, so they've been hit. Superdry, we're seeing a lot of the retail stocks being hit here, and that's just showing in the charts. A terrible looking chart there. In Europe, the top 50 in Europe this morning, we're seeing here SocGen. They're up 28, up there 1.2%, and that chart really looking like quite a good recovery situation. Not yet on the long term, but we're seeing the relative returning there. And if we look at the downside, we're seeing here it's Iberdrola. There's only a handful of stocks down in Europe this morning, only 4 stocks in the 50. Iberdrola, Spain. We're just seeing that selling off there a little bit on that relative, and the relative breaking down. So Iberdrola and Enel, Air Liquide. We're seeing quite a few energy stocks lower, resource stocks higher, energy stocks lower. Is quite an interesting play, and there we see the live pricing coming in from Yahoo Finance. That's it for today. Until next time, happy charting. See you then.